Hello, friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, coming in before the show to share some great news. New news! Our podcast has been supported for months now by Misty Mountain Gaming, and they're now rewarding you, our listeners, with savings on all their fine D&D products such as metal dice, stone dice, glass dice, miniatures, adventures, dice trays, and more. You can use the code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, to save 10% on all purchases made in their online store at mistymountaingaming.com. Every code redeemed helps support Steven and I, and encourages us to make more and better content for you. So be sure to use code TWINS10 whenever you're buying premium Dungeons & Dragons dice and gear from our good friends at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
Finally, we're inside. Lock the door. Tie up the prisoner.
Wait, who are you people? Why am I blindfolded? Look, I don't have much, but I'll pay you if you just let me go.
We don't want your money. You need to be taught a lesson for your crimes against the society.
Society? What the heck are you talking about? I'm not a member of any society.
Not anymore, you're not. Tighten the ropes, brother.
Wait, no, you don't have to do this. Ow! Hey, that's really tight. Please, guys, hold on. Wait, I recognize those sweaty hands anywhere. Kevin, is that you?
No.
God, Kevin, what the heck, man? I told you to wear gloves.
I'm sorry, I did, but my hands just got so moist and pruny in there. I had to air them out eventually. I'm sorry, Jake.
Kevin! I said no names!
Jake?
Wait, my bad.
Are you guys the players from Rob's game last night?
Well, cat's out of the bag now. I guess he knows who we are. Might as well take his blindfold off while you're at it.
Okay, here you go.
Thanks. What exactly am I doing in a basement tied up to a chair? Rob promised me in no uncertain terms that D&D was not a sex thing.
This is not a sex thing! It's not that kind of role-playing, I keep telling you. Look, this is your punishment for betraying our party. We invited you into our brotherhood, our society, allowed you to join our campaign, and in your first session, you already broke three of our most sacred rules.
What? That's impossible. Rob and I talked for like an hour about how to play this game. And then he even gave my character sheet a once-over just to make sure that there weren't any mistakes. And then I read the book that he lent me, and I didn't do anything that wasn't on my sheet, double-checked my math, and I was honest about all the rules, even the bad ones. I don't get it, guys. What did I do to deserve this?
What did he do? He asked. You believe this one. Kevin, remind the prisoner of his transgressions.
Oh, okay. Colin, you're guilty of making a treacherous character that already stole from our ranger. You then voluntarily split the party not once, but twice for your own gain without concern for your party. You were then seen unevenly distributing the post-fight loot, withholding half the gold, and taking an item that was clearly better for Jake's character prior to said distribution. We also observed 3 separate counts of unimmersive metagaming, and you ate all of my Doritos and didn't bring any snacks to share.
That's plenty, Kevin. No need to continue. You see, Colin, do you feel the weight of your sins? What do you have to say for yourself, you scum?
I actually read the book that Rob lent me, and I don't think it talked about any of this stuff.
Preposterous. Your actions besmirched our most sacred rules. They are doubtless within our texts. Give me that handbook. It clearly says right here in the player's handbook that... No?
Well, in Chapter 8, Adventuring, there's going to be...
What about Chapter 9?
Let me check the appendices. It's in here somewhere. I
Try
promise.
turning that page
No,
over.
it must be.
I think you're holding it upside down.
So wait, are you guys saying that I didn't even break any rules? Then why did the things I did in that game upset you so much?
Well, your actions blatantly disregarded the team dynamic. They overtly contradicted the accepted optimal way of doing things. They were unfair. They ignored courtesy. They eschewed protocol. You didn't play right.
So wait, I just had fun wrong?
Well, no, I mean,
well.
not exactly. I mean, I don't guess you can really have fun wrong.
I mean, maybe this just isn't the game I thought it was.
Huh. Hey, Jake, you remember when you said that Colin needed to be taught a lesson? I think that's exactly what he needs.
Whoa. Kevin, what are you doing with that knife? Hey, man. Hey, buddy, we can just talk about this. There's no
we're
reason
gonna
to
talk about it.
No, we don't need to talk. I swear, I've learned my lesson.
Hold still. There.
But, hey, Kevin, wait, the rope. Why are you letting him go?
You're letting me go?
Of course I'm letting it go, Jake. Look, Colin is new to this game and to our group, and maybe give him a little context for what's going on.
Rules.
See, Colin, over the past few years, we've learned a few things that can make the game more fun for everyone involved. And maybe, before escalating things to, kidnapping and torture,
Wait, did he just say torture?
we should just calm down and talk for a little bit about why Jake's upset, why he feels like what you did was wrong, and why, under all that aggression, he may have a couple of good points worth discussing.
Welcome back, friends and adventurers, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration.
Hello.
It's me, Rob, the D&D wannabe, back with Steven, my brother.
Hi, yes, hello, I'm here as well. Welcome back to this week's episode, which is a little bit of a different format than the ones that we usually present you with. Normally, our episodes are kind of topical or how-tos, or are intended to stir up some thoughts within you about ways to improve your campaign, but this episode is very much inspired by an article written by another content creator out there on the internet.
Yes, Victor Coble has been writing articles for a long time for Comic Book Resources, CBR.com. And he posted not that long ago, maybe that long ago by the time this episode comes out, called D&D, 10 Unspoken Rules. And I browsed by an ad for that particular article. It's a D&D thing. I felt like I had to click on it. And I read over it and thought, this is kind of a crummy list. I'm sorry, Victor Coble. Things that you presented were not necessarily untrue. They didn't particularly relate to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the edition that everybody is playing these days, including Steven and I. And they also weren't unspoken rules. Some of them weren't rules at all, and some of them were rules straight out of the book. But it did get me thinking, what are some unspoken rules of D&D? And I put the question to Steven. He came up with the bulk of a list, and we're going to be talking about that list today.
Right. We don't want to disparage Victor Coble or his work or his article. Well, at least not in this episode. Rob did make a YouTube video where he directly responded to each of Victor's points and said what he liked about them and what he didn't like about them.
Yeah, I read more of Victor Coble's articles. I went down kind of a rabbit hole just to see if we agreed on anything. And we agree on a lot of stuff, just not this list.
But in this episode, we're really going to be kind of talking about what we think a list like that would look like for 5th edition, using our own thoughts on the matter that we've collaborated upon. So what exactly do we mean by the unspoken rules of D&D?
So, as we're compiling our personal list of top 10 or however many it winds up being, unspoken rules of D&D, I guess we should define our terms, right? When we say unspoken rule of D&D, what do we mean?
I think the easiest way to define this is to kind of look at video games or, even board games to an extent. Many of you are probably familiar with the concept of a meta, which is the most commonly accepted way to behave when playing a game. And it could have something to do with your build or your behavior or the optimal way to do things. So what we're going to be covering in this episode is a little bit of the meta of Dungeons & Dragons 5e, at least in mine and Rob's experience. These are rules which are generally accepted to be true by veteran players and expected of the other members of the party, but that don't come from any source book and that most veteran players probably haven't actually taken the time to explain to newer players, because it's more of something that they have developed. It's more something that they just kind of understand now by virtue of having made some contrary decisions in the past.
Sure, and I like that comparison to the meta of a game. If you play League of Legends, you expect to have someone going top lane, support, and an ADC going bot, somebody in the mid lane, and somebody hiding out in the jungle. And you assume that everyone else in your lobby is kind of on the same page with that. And if you're not, you're going to have problems. And it's not that the game can't be played a different way. It is that set of expectations that everyone else in your lobby, at your table, has of you.
Right. League of Legends is an interesting example because it has, I think it's over 120 champions now. And it's generally understood that certain champions were designed to fill certain roles within the game. And even those roles are balanced around the meta. Like even the game designers are having to take it into account at this point. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you taking any champion and filling any position in the game. But boy, will the other players on your team let you know about it the minute you lock it in.
As we're going over these unspoken rules, they are expectations that the other players will have of you. And as you mentioned earlier, they don't appear in any of the source books. They're not a part of any other rules. They're just kind of... We discussed the social contract of playing D&D before and the set of expectations coming to the table. This is kind of the same deal. Less in terms of interpersonal behavior and more in terms of inter-character behavior. Chances are, if you're familiar with the game of D&D and you've been playing it for a while, nothing we talk about this week is going to be news to you.
Right. This episode is something that you can send to new players who have just gotten started out in the game. Don't overwhelm them when they're trying to figure out the mechanics of how to put together a character sheet. But immediately thereafter, these are good things for them to know, because even if you don't necessarily expect all this of them, probably someone at your table does.
And hey, if the players at your table have taken umbrage with something that you have done, maybe give this episode a listen. Chances are you might have accidentally stumbled across one of these unspoken rules.
At the very least, I hope that this episode will give you a little bit of perspective to make you think about the expectations that you have that you may not have ever actually voiced. And it'll maybe give you a chance to prompt that conversation at your table.
Right. If this podcast has proven anything, it's that we enjoy taking things that are unspoken and speaking them.
So, new players, hi, welcome to the show. These are things that many veteran players understand and will subconsciously expect of you, even though they may not voice it or consciously recognize it in themselves. It's just a generally accepted method of play and code of conduct, basically the meta. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. You ready, Rob?
Sure, go for it.
All right. Unspoken rule number 1. Don't split the party. See, Victor Coble, I didn't hate your list. I actually thought that this was a really good place to start.
Yeah, well, I addressed in my video that this is not my favorite of your rules. There are good reasons why this has become such a meme in the D&D community.
This is a great place to start for me because I think that there are both mechanical and in-character and around-the-table reasons for wanting to keep the group together. As far as the mechanical reasons are concerned, we're going to get more into those a little bit later on, but let's just say that no single character is a one-man army, and it's always better to have a little bit of backup in case something goes awry. No character is immune to everything that the Dungeon Master can throw at you. And if you end up in a bad situation, it's always good to have at least one other person that can go and run for help.
Sure. A lot of D&D is dangerous. I mean, even the stuff that doesn't seem dangerous on the surface is probably dangerous just beneath the surface. So having backup, having a helping hand nearby is always going to be a good call. No individual character has such a broad skill set that they can handle everything themselves. Furthermore, even the characters that seem self-sufficient, like a cleric who can cast spells and mix it up in melee combat and cast healing magic, can't cast that healing magic on themselves if they get knocked to 0 hit points. Characters who are alone can get petrified, charmed, dominated, possessed, and no one will be able to help, and no one will be any the wiser.
Exactly, and that's exactly where I was going to go with those mechanical implications. But let's also talk a little bit about just kind of around the table. Let's assume that you're not so foolhardy as to go off completely on your own, but there's more of an even split between the party members. This can be really useful to accomplish certain tasks or to handle social encounters, and there are honestly a lot of good reasons to do it. But aside from the mechanical implications, the main reason that I would caution you, especially as a new player, against splitting the party is because then the dungeon master is going to have to choose between one group of players and the other at any given moment. And thus, each player around the table went from playing the whole evening to playing half an evening.
Yeah, the role of the Dungeon Master gets compared to a lot of different aspects of the film industry. You know, the Dungeon Master is the producer, the Dungeon Master is the writer, the Dungeon Master is the director. But sometimes the Dungeon Master is just the cameraman, and he decides who is in focus at any given moment. And you can only have so many things on screen at one time. And if someone's on the 3rd floor of the castle and somebody's in the dungeon, we can't run 2 games at once. I mean, we can do a lot of things, but I haven't nailed that yet.
Like I said before, there are a lot of situations when I, as a player, actually think splitting the party is kind of a good idea and end up doing it. But in a lot of situations, I also end up with buyer's remorse, because even though we are encountering twice the number of things at any given moment, we're doing it half as fast, and I am only getting to interact with half a game. I set aside my entire night to play Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm actually only doing it for about an hour and a half. So, especially as new players, when in doubt, stick together. Handle the things one at a time. You'll probably have more fun that way.
We will come back at the end of our list and talk a little bit about how none of these unspoken rules are laws.
Right.
But it is an unspoken rule, and it is a rule for a reason, that your team is most functional when together, your characters have the best chance of surviving when they're together, and the story stays cohesive and moves at its best pace.
Well, I put that point first because Victor put that point first, but it's not actually the one that I think is going to come up first, nor do I think that it is the most important. I think it's about time we did tackle that one now, because I don't want to get too far down the list without emphasizing the importance of making an adventurer during the character creation process.
What? In an adventure game? What?
When I made my first character for that Pathfinder game where you brought all those people over to my house,
That cringy game?
It was fun.
It was fun. My character was cringy.
I really enjoyed it. I really liked my character. And as I created my character, I really had to curb the urge to make him a lone wolf edgelord and make him a party edgelord. Because making a cooperative adventurer, someone who wants to go out and explore the dungeons and fight the dragons and save the princesses and do that as part of a group of like-minded individuals, or maybe individuals who occasionally disagree on some things. But if everyone makes someone who wants to go out and actively engage in the world and confront its problems head on, or, with a modicum of subterfuge, is key to having fun in a group game. On top of that, making someone who wants to cooperate is kind of a big deal.
Right. In real life, which D&D reflects and mimics often, it is entirely believable to think that there are lots of characters out there, lots of individuals who want to take it easy, who want to play it safe, who only ever have their own interests at heart, and don't take risks. But we came here, all of us, this week, this session, to play D&D, which is a fantasy adventure game filled with danger and adventure and risk. Creating a character that wants to go out there for whatever reason, and it can be any number of reasons, to go out there and interact with the world is so important. Nobody wants to spend their whole campaign in a tavern serving drinks or consuming drinks or what have you. It is just not interesting or fun. And if you are in a group of adventurers who want to go have an adventure and you want to stay in the tavern, you will stay in that tavern, and the adventure and the camera will drive into the distance without you.
Yeah, I have heard horror stories of players who have made characters who just had different priorities from the rest of the party. And I don't mean that in a sense of, they wanted to slay goblins while everyone else wanted to slay dragons. That sort of thing the party can work out. Go online, there are plenty of horror stories about parties who have had to deal with a non-adventuring character. It just does not lend itself to a fun, cohesive game.
I think Not, or Veth, from Critical Role Campaign 2, is a great example of this. She, in some senses, was a stay-at-home mom originally. Mm-hmm. She had a loving husband, she had a family, she had a child, and she could easily have not wanted to go on any adventures. But thanks to some stuff that happened in the campaign, she found herself flung into a world where she was put in danger. And while she still cared about her family and protecting them, keeping them safe and providing for them, she caught the bug. She got a taste for adventure. And she wanted to go out and keep adventuring with her friends and making lots of money and saving the world. Because through the course of that campaign, she became an adventurer. And Sam Riegel, getting ready to play that character, had this in mind from the start.
Right. The character of Veth is a good example because she started out as a mom and then she was cursed and she had to adventure to fix the curse. Then she had to adventure to find and save her family. And then after that, she realized that her husband would rather be a stay-at-home dad. And adventuring was a very lucrative line of work. So she just carried on with it. Until eventually she does go back and settle down after she has got them set for retirement.
And importantly, to your point that you made earlier, Veth realized that she was not going to break that curse alone. She was not going to provide for her family alone. She was not going to save the world alone. That kind of reasoning put her in the party and kept her there.
Veth is also a good example of my next point, because she was a very carefully made, somewhat selfish character. She had a little bit of a penchant for pickpocketing, and she was a little bit duplicitous, but at the end of the day, she still cared about the party, and she still wanted to see them all succeed. And that has a lot to do with the next point. I didn't really know if this was the next point, or if this is a subset of making a good cooperative adventurer, but guys, don't betray your party. Okay? You guys are a team. You guys are all working together. You guys are all on the same mission. You may have different long-term goals, but let's face it, right now, the main thing is not assassinating the warlock, and it's not pickpocketing the wizard. It's probably rescuing the mayor from the goblin den.
This, to me, was a reason to make this whole episode. Your party is going to face a lot of challenges. The Dungeon Master is going to throw duplicitous people. They're going to throw monsters, villains, enemies, major and minor, and traps and obstacles in your way. The last thing anyone at the table needs is to be worrying about someone else at the table on top of all of that.
Yeah. this rule could have also just been summarized as don't be a dick, guys.
Yeah, don't be a dick.
Yeah. Okay. The big defense that you always hear is it's what my character would do. But Rob, it's what my character would do. Okay, why'd you make a dick? That is not an adequate defense. Don't make a character who would do that sort of thing. You can be selfish without being actively antagonistic towards the party and actively hindering them from accomplishing their goals. I have heard of some really cool moments in campaigns where the DM and a player get together from the start and set something up like this, and how it's really fun for the other characters because now they have a person they get to hate later on. But don't just take it upon yourself to do that during the course of the campaign, and definitely don't come up with something like that on your own, because you're probably just going to make the rest of the table more frustrated with you than thinking, oh, wow, that was so cool. And did you really come to this table and spend all this time just to be mean to your friends?
Right. I keep saying this episode after episode, and I guess I'll keep saying it until my voice stops working. But we come to play D&D to have fun. And it may be fun for you to take that magic item out of the fighter's pocket because you think it goes well with your vest, but it's not fun for the guy playing the fighter. And they are responsible for your fun, you are responsible for their fun, and you're a team. Your characters are a team. If you want to make someone who's a dick, make them a dick to everybody in the fictional world.
Except the party.
But the guys in your party. That's fine. Everyone has someone or someone's special to them. It can be their family, it can be their closest friends, or it can be the guys in their squad who are watching their back at all times. Your life is entrusted to that party in dangerous life or death situations. At some point, your life, your character's life, will be in the hands of that fighter. And you know what? Maybe he'd do a better job of saving it with that magic item.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to scratch that itch. Be mean to the DM and his NPCs. Don't be mean to your fellow players.
Yeah, DMs make despicable characters. They love it when you're despicable to the despicable characters. They deserve it. That's why they were made. That is not why that player made that fighter.
Yeah, and as fun as it can be to go through and swap out all of your party's healing potions with little vials of poison, someday they may use those to try to pick you up from 0 HP.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, ever think of that, guys? And whether they're trying to heal you or another party member, that little gotcha moment is much better spent on an NPC than a party member.
Hey, and speaking of trying to heal your fellow party members, that segues nicely into the next unspoken rule of D&D.
Oh, is that our next point?
I'm particularly delighted about this one because when you threw it on the list, it would never have occurred to me to put this item on this list. And yet, I absolutely expect it of everyone who plays with me and under me.
What can I say? I'm aware of my own expectations for people, and I think I know for the most part what is expected of me around the table.
I think this is a great example of, nothing from nothing. This is a great example of why we make this podcast in the way that we make it, because sometimes being behind the screen makes me lose the perspective of how the players interact and what they expect of one another. And this is, let's face it, this is a very player-focused episode. Dungeon Masters aren't going to get as much out of this episode as maybe they will of some of our previous episodes. But for the players and for the player mindset, I am glad to have you sitting in front of a microphone.
Woo! So this next point we termed No Man Left Behind. And the basic premise of it is this. When a player character goes down, getting them back up needs to be a priority for the party.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for a lot of different reasons. There are the mechanical ones where action economy is a thing. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. And having all of your characters alive and able to participate in any given combat is far more to your benefit than getting to make an extra attack right now. But even more than that, players invest heavily in their characters. And creating a new PC takes time and effort and a lot of planning for the player who's going to be making them. And it also takes a lot of planning and effort on the part of the DM in order to integrate this new character in your campaign. And it can be tricky.
And it wastes a lot of time that they already spent developing that character's story arc.
So time consuming. Yeah. And on top of that, you're adding more work by having them integrate a new character into the story. So even if you're just thinking about your friends around the table and not about the story, making sure that character doesn't die is a real bro move for your friends around the table.
Just a couple of episodes ago, I was making fun of players who took the tough feat for their characters because they were afraid of dropping to zero and dying in a world where resurrection exists. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, death is such a impermanent thing. Why would you be worried about it?
Right.
And, I still hold that opinion. But the fact of the matter is, a round of combat takes a while. And for the same reasons that you don't want to split the party, because that means that somebody at the table is not getting to play the game, somebody at the table doesn't get to play the game while their character, the one entity in the world that they are responsible for piloting,
they're linked to the story,
is unconscious on the ground. Exactly. If you don't have a character conscious, you have nobody to Jaeger around this fantasy world. You can't play the game. And yes, you're risking them dying, and that may or may not be permanent, but it will take time for that character to be able to play again. Maybe it's just the time until someone revives them. Maybe it's the time until they get healed and pick back up. Or maybe it's the time that it takes them to roll up another character and for the dungeon master to convincingly and immersively integrate them into the tale that you're all spinning together. But that is all precious game time.
And I'm not saying that you as an individual player are personally responsible for all the other player characters in the story. No. And character death will happen. It is part of the game. But for the player who has put all of this thought into the character and put all of this time into playing them and leveling them up and developing their story, if you ignore them when they go down and opt to do some other action when you have the opportunity to save them, the other player might take that a little personally. And that may be warranted and it may not. I'm just letting you know that that may be an expectation they have in their mind of which you might want to be aware.
I mean, this was a big deal in Critical Role Campaign 2 when Mollymock died, right? He was laying on the ground, he failed a death save, and we went around, or past several turns in combat at the very least. I forget exactly how it went down. But there was an opportunity for people to intervene in the fact that he was laying on the ground bleeding out. And then, after just a few turns of inaction on the part of the party, a villain of the story walks over and impales the body on the ground and twists the weapon. Suddenly there's a dead player character. And the characters in the story weren't of a level or point of having resources to bring Mollymock back. And old TJ had to roll up a new character.
Mm-hmm. I also remember, I don't remember exactly which combat it was. I want to say it was during the Laughing Hand arc of Campaign 2, where Beauregard went down and had failed 2 death saving throws. And it was the cleric's turn, and she cast Guiding Bolt. As opposed to healing Bo. And then you see Laura, who is playing Jester the cleric, looking around at the table, and everyone is just like, Travis, her husband, is just frantically pointing at Marisha, trying to communicate to her from across the live stage that Beauregard was down. And finally she caught on and changed what she did, but, you know, all those Beauregard stands out there may have been looking at a different character had that not happened. And you could tell by Marisha's face, she was just waiting for Laura to heal her. And Travis was frantically reminding her that she had the opportunity to save the character, and Laura was just over there. She wanted to deal some damage. So,
yeah, you can't bank on that down character rolling that natural 20. You gotta have your friends back. In the same way that you don't betray the party because you have their back and they have yours, you gotta pick their butts up if they go down.
And I did mention that this tied a little bit into the action economy. 5th edition really heavily emphasizes how many things your team can do versus how many things the bad guys can do. Even if the combat doesn't start this way, the combat will always end with the team that can do the most things coming out on top. For that reason, we have one of Rob's additions to this list, which is Focus Your Fire.
Yeah, you come up on a team of enemy orcs or cultists or devils or what have you, and it's your party versus them. If everybody in your party picks different targets, it is unlikely that any of their team is going to go down, and that they will all get to do something to ruin your day the next turn. Unless you prioritize your targets, work together, and take them down systematically. If you will do that, if you will prioritize the targets, you will eliminate their team more quickly than they are capable of eliminating yours. And when that happens, you gain an advantage that has the opportunity to build upon itself. If you have 5 guys and they have 5 guys, you take one out, now it's 5 on 4. And that 5 on 4 is very likely to quickly become 5 on 3, on 2, on 1, and spell victory for your team.
Right, because the team that has the most combatants has the most actions. That means they have the most chances to take action, to act, and to react to what is happening turn by turn, round by round. So the basic premise of the thought is this, that if you on average deal, let's say, 9 damage a round, that 9 damage is far, far better spent on the guy that has 8 health than the guy that has 20 health. Because that will deprive the other team of a full turn that round after that NPC goes down. Because remember, in 5th edition, that guy who has 8 health is exactly as capable of killing you as the guy who has 20 health. As long as you are standing, you can deal just as much damage whether you have full health or only 1 hit point left.
Right. The bad guys have the same abilities you do. You operate at full functioning capacity at 1 HP as you do at 100. And the bad guys do too. And this gets even more important when you're talking about big, consequential fights against powerful enemies. If there is a lich standing there with a bunch of skeletal minions, who you think the party needs to be focusing on? The guys that are wielding rusty short swords, or the guy who can cast 9th level spells? No, the guy that is packing the most heat needs to go down, and needs to go down first, and as soon as humanly possible. Any effort spent elsewhere is delaying your win condition, which is getting rid of that boss. And you find the similar principles in video games, and even in some board games. So it's not a new concept, but it's never spelled out in D&D, and it can make combats that are technically speaking balanced for your party infinitely harder if you don't obey this unspoken rule.
Exactly. It's not anything that the other player is going to tell you before your turn that you have to do, but when you don't drop the enemy with 1 HP left and you instead start working on the next one, they'll probably let you know about it, or they'll, toss their character sheet into the air in frustration at you.
Hey, that bad guy with 1 hit point is going to remind you what you should have done when its turn comes around.
It's just good strategy, and it's an efficient way to handle the combat. So just take these things under advisement when you are trying to decide what to do on your turn. If you have an attack that you can use, don't put it into your party member's back. Use it on the enemy that has the lowest HP. And if one of your fellow PCs is down, consider picking them up rather than using your attack. And thus ends, for now, my in-combat considerations. The rest of the things on this list are kind of just more general. I guess these aren't so much unspoken rules as kind of more of accepted norms or social mores when playing the game. But as we talk about the game and its associated meta, it might do to talk about metagaming.
This is a sensitive topic because the term metagaming has garnered such a negative stigma in the D&D community, even though it's something that we all do. And it's not entirely bad. In fact, there are certain things that we as players know that our characters don't necessarily, that enable us to play and enjoy the game. Some of which we just talked about. I mean, our previous 5 points were technically metagaming.
Right, and I have a lot of notes about what metagaming I think is acceptable and what metagaming I think is not. Don't worry, we're going to cover that in a future episode. It's more than we can fit into an existing one with 2 pages of notes. But what a lot of people usually mean when they refer to the concept of metagaming is using your player knowledge as though it was your character's knowledge as well.
So this can take a lot of different forms. Some of the most sinful, shall we say,
the most egregious,
are when the dungeon master shows you something that is apart from where your character is. Say that you did split the party, you are on those 2 separate floors of the castle, and we cut away from a dramatic scene where new information was revealed back down to your party, 2 stories below, where the information that the other group just gained could influence decisions that you are currently making. Not allowing that information to affect your character's decisions is commendable. Allowing it to affect your character's decisions is the bad sort of metagaming.
Let's say that you did split the party, and 2 floors down, the rest of the party just came across a genie in a bottle, and it's handing out free wishes. And the DM cuts back to you 2 floors up, and with no message spell to communicate this in between the 2 of you, and says, "Hey, Rob, what is it that you're doing right now while this is going on?" And you say, you know what? I think it's about time I went downstairs and checked on the rest of the party. We've been gone for almost 5 minutes, and I just really miss those guys. So that you can go downstairs and maybe snag that 3rd wish before it's expended. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about here. And let's say that you're exploring said castle on your way down to catch that last wish from the genie in the bottle, right? And as you walk down the hallway, the dungeon master asks you to make a perception check. Now, by virtue of them asking you to make this perception check, you may suspect that there is a trap ahead. Then, making a low roll and using that knowledge that they probably didn't ask you to make this roll for no reason, you decide to take the other stairwell. That would be using your player knowledge as though it were your character knowledge. Your character was just walking down a hall, and nothing happened, and he decided to take the scenic route.
Yes.
If the DM decides you didn't see the trap, you didn't see the trap. If he says that you didn't see the ambush waiting for you behind an overturned cart in the city, it doesn't matter that you see that he just pulled out all of his minis. You're using your privileged player knowledge to affect your character's decisions, and that is what most people would define as metagaming, and it's kind of breaking the game in the wrong way. You know, it's breaking the immersion, and you're actively making things less fun for the dungeon master.
One that dungeon masters get called on a good bit and kind of need to be careful to avoid is, I know a bunch about monsters, Stephen. I know their immunities, I know their vulnerabilities, I know how their regenerative properties work, and if I come up against a troll, Rob knows I need fire, or that thing is going to continue to be a problem. Or if I come up against a flame skull, I know that even if we crush that skull to pieces, it is going to reassemble itself and return unless we sprinkle its remains with holy water. Me knowing those things and allowing them to affect my character's behavior, who may not have ever encountered or heard of a flame skull before, would be metagaming. It is allowing my player knowledge to affect my character's actions and behaviors, and that is basically nullifying the drama and the excitement of the game. It ruins my own immersion.
Just another reason why it's hard to have the dungeon master be a player.
It's hard, but it's so worth it. Please don't not do that. Speaking of character knowledge, let's talk about a different kind of character knowledge. Knowledge about your character, and how that is your responsibility as a player at the table.
Yeah, I know that this isn't the first time that we mentioned this on the podcast, because it's one of Rob's big pet peeves, and if you've played in any of his games, he's probably let you know about it before.
Hi, I'm Rob.
Suffice to say, for the sake of efficiency, if for nothing else, each player should know how to mechanically control their character. They should have a good, basic, functional level understanding of what they can do on their turn, what resources they have on their disposal, and the limitations of said abilities. As a player, if you have to pull out the PHB or the supplemental book of your choice in order to look something up every one of your turns on your turn, then it's just not very respectful of the rest of the table's time.
So, we joke, and yes, this is something that's important to me as a dungeon master, to know that you are a little bit invested in the game that we're all playing together, that you have taken the time to learn one particular character's abilities. Me as the dungeon master, I love this stuff. I eat, drink, and sleep this stuff. I read rules literally for fun, and I don't expect that everyone at the table is going to have my personal proclivities in this regard. I know a lot about a lot of creatures, monsters, rules, worlds, planes, and etc. I expect you, as a player, to be familiar enough with your character to functionally play them. And you know what? Especially when you get into some higher level characters, particularly spellcasters, there is a lot to remember. And I don't expect you to have every iota of that in your head. But either have it on a handy piece of paper close by, have a player's handbook or other reference book dog-eared to the correct pages, or have an app on your phone that lets you easily look things up in a quick moment before your turn comes around, so that the play can continue as seamlessly as possible. And so, as you said, you are being respectful of everyone else's time, because I would be surprised if when someone else takes 15 minutes on their turn trying to decide what to do because they thought that spell did something different, you weren't just the least little bit annoyed.
And there are plenty of resources out there for you. Things like D&D Beyond will give you a reference book and a page number when you select your different abilities. But if you're playing on pen and paper or Roll20, just jot down the source book and the page number, or give yourself like the Cliff's Notes versions of what your spells do on a separate sheet of paper, so that you can at least say, hey, this is the range, the number of components, this is what action it takes to cast, this is the duration, and a quick synopsis of what it does. Do what you need to do to make that easier on yourself, because if you're setting aside 3 hours, say, a week to play, you don't want to waste any more of that than you have to doing the easy stuff. There is way too much content out there, even for the people who are obsessive about this sort of thing, like Rob and I, to have perfectly memorized. Every once in a while, we'll call each other on a rule that the other person didn't know about. And that's more often a one-way street, but, every once in a while I surprise him. But the ability to know where in the book that you need to go to be able to find that information, or having something pulled up online, it goes a long way, and I guarantee everyone around your table will appreciate that.
Yeah, you make a good point about the accessibility of these things, this information on the internet. I think there's not a thing anymore, even of very recently published content, that I couldn't find for free with a cursory Google search. As long as I know the name and have the spelling right, I can find the info I need. And if I can do it, you can do it. And it also means I'm probably spending too much money on D&D Beyond. But I can't help it. I love that stuff, and I love being able to have my players access that character creator. That's worth the money right there to me. Just to know that everything is done the way I want it done, which is correctly.
It is worth every penny of Rob's money to me as well. Going back to
D&D Beyond, please sponsor us.
Going back to one of our earlier points, we mentioned that making a cooperative adventurer and sticking with the rest of your party was important. In addition to all the other reasons that we mentioned before, this is important because, as Rob alluded earlier, no single player character in the game of D&D is a solo act. You are not a one-man band. You are an ensemble. Each different character within the party is going to have their own strengths and weaknesses, And the game is designed to where you're not going to be good at everything. You need each other.
Well, unless you're a bard.
That's okay. You're going to be good at some skills as a bard. It's not all about skills.
Oh, no. You can fight, you can cast magic, you can heal, you can support. A bard can do it all. But if you're not a bard, then you're going to need lots of help from the rest of your party. And like you said, it's not a one-man band. It's an ensemble. The game is designed around the assumption that you are going to have help, that the challenges that you face will present the sort of obstacles that will take a group to overcome. The encounters are balanced for parties, not for individuals. Very few player characters can solo most monsters. I mean, it takes one bad saving throw from even some low-level creatures for your character to be incapacitated, paralyzed, petrified, dominated, charmed, or otherwise taken out of the fight. I think we alluded to this a little bit in a previous point, like you said.
Yeah, if you try to do everything yourself, you're probably not going to find success. If you do, you're probably not going to find a great deal of satisfaction. And even if you do, the rest of the table certainly won't. The game is designed to where you play to your strengths, and you're supposed to call upon others to use theirs as well. In fact, the game has a lot of ways that you can help other people that a lot of people don't even take advantage of. Of course, there's things like the guidance spell, and there's Bardic Inspiration, but literally anyone in your party can take the help action to give each other advantage on their rolls. If you want to get real creative with it, there was a combat in the campaign that I ran where your character positioned themselves at a choke point and repeatedly took the dodge action turn after turn to allow the rest of the party to escape, because you, even as a 12 AC sorcerer boy, were standing and holding back a small army of much more capable bugbears just by the virtue of the fact that you were blocking their way and making yourself as hard to hit as that little 12 AC butt of yours could.
Yeah, and, you know, there's nothing glamorous about being the guy taking the dodge action. There's nothing glamorous about being basically the tiefling equivalent of a fence. But it is effective, it did the job, and my fellow players were able to accomplish the goal by virtue of me doing that. Not to pat myself too much on the back, and let's face it, I paid for it. That character died.
Well, on the contrary, I, as the DM, thought that was pretty cool in that it pretty much shut down my combat for a couple of rounds and allowed the rest of the team to do whatever they wanted. And I'm pretty sure they felt the same way because they could sense how frustrated I was getting that all of my bugbears couldn't walk past the sorcerer. So I think that was a pretty cool thing to do. So new players and even some veteran players out there, if you want to do like the really sexy thing for your party, try to help them out.
Yeah, and we talked about different characters having different strengths when it comes to the table. That really makes me think of that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, when Rocket and Gamora and Drax and Star-Lord are all trying to break out of that prison. And Rocket was the guy with the plan, such as it was, and he had jobs for everyone to do. We've talked in other episodes about the A-Team and being the guy. And when you're the guy, you want your friends to come to you when the thing needs doing. And that makes me feel good when my thing needs doing and suddenly 3 heads around the table all turn to me thinking, you got this. And sometimes it's my face swinging to them saying, need you to step up now, buddy.
No, you got this.
It's your time to shine.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's fun. You know, it's fun to cooperate. Sometimes the heroic thing to do is to let others do. Sometimes it's easier for your friends, your team, your squad, your party to do when they are properly equipped.
Which moves us on to our second point, which is make sure you share the loot. I almost made this a subset of you aren't a solo act, and I almost made this a subset of Don't Betray the Party, but the distribution of gold, resources, and especially magic items is really important. I mean, let's face it, a lot of this is, in a way, your character advancement in between levels.
Sure.
That the DM is handing out to you, he's giving you more resources, he's giving you new abilities in the form of stuff you can attune to. And hoarding that for yourself keeps the other players from advancing. And not allowing that wealth to be spread around kind of makes your party weaker as a consequence. I think this is one of the big reasons why 5th edition added the concept of attunement. It's not just to have the players make some important decisions and to keep them from becoming overpowered, it's to make sure that as the party fills up with magical items, it mechanically has to get handed out eventually, starting at attuned item number 4.
Yeah, there's rarely going to be a magic item that is going to benefit your character, not at all. But that doesn't mean that you are the best person to have every magic item in your party. What could be a small boon to you could make a world of difference somewhere else at the table. And odds are, your dungeon master had that in mind when she rolled up this loot, or gave you that item, or put that loot somewhere in the dungeon. She probably had in mind, this is probably going to go to the wizard, and the fighter might take that. And just because you can use something, doesn't mean you should. And furthermore, making an executive decision for yourself, regardless of the input of the rest of the party, isn't going to fly at my table. Probably shouldn't at yours either.
Going back to the design of the game, I think this is another reason why the creators differentiated between, say, Rod of the Pact Keeper and a Bloodwell Vial. This is specifically an item for warlocks, and this is specifically an item for sorcerers, so that the DM had a little bit more control about who ended up with what, and which characters needed a boost at that given time.
You know, the Godfather and I have agreed on some homebrew for our own D&D worlds. And that is that items like the Gauntlets of Ogre Strength or Ogre Power, whichever one it is, or the Headband of Intellect, I don't remember what they're called because we agreed that they didn't exist in our world. No item is going to take you from whatever your ability score is all the way up to a 19. Because you know why that item is in there? It's to give some low-level wizard or barbarian the ability to do the thing they already do better. It is not to take your idiot character who never uses that ability score and suddenly have them outclass the person that actually needs that ability score to do their job. And we just decided if the 6 intelligence barbarian and the 15 intelligence wizard are both going to be fighting over that item, we'd rather just not have that fight.
And you probably had to do that because the most mechanical benefit is achieved by giving the barbarian the Headband of Intellect, or by giving the wizard the Gauntlets of Ogre Power.
Well, you say that. The largest difference in ability score modifiers is there.
That is what I meant, yes.
That doesn't mean necessarily the most mechanical benefit, because what good is that modifier going to do that barbarian when crap hits the fan?
Muscle Wizards cast Fist, Rob.
Yeah, Muscle Wizards cast Fist. Anyway, you see my point.
Yes, I do.
That the loot should be distributed evenly amongst the party. If I didn't get an item last time, maybe I get one this time. And if I got one this time, maybe I'm not going to get one the next time a magic item shows up in the party's lap. And it should usually go to where it's going to do the most good for keeping all of us alive.
Right, and if you do get 2 magic items in a row, maybe consider handing off the one you got last time to one of the other characters who might be in need of a little bump. Because remember, like I said, this loot is a form of advancement for you, and for them.
It is a reward of playing the game that you earned through roleplay. So, yes, that kind of thing should be spread around. Share the loot, love.
Anything else that you want to say on the matter of equipment?
Somewhat. I think this definitely qualifies as an unspoken rule, because the times that it has come up and this rule hasn't been followed have been memorable, but they have not been optimal. And they have caused kind of a bad time for the person who finds themselves breaking this rule. So, one of my few additions to this list for unspoken rules of D&D is always be packing. If you do not have a weapon handy, or know where one is, or in a Jason Bourne kind of way, know where the weapons are in the room you are in, and something goes down because, hey, it's D&D, something's gonna go down. You are going to have a bad time, and you will potentially disappoint the other characters who are depending on you functioning at optimal capacity for their own survival.
Right. As an adventurer, you want to make sure that you have all of your resources at your disposal. It's kind of in keeping with the theme that I had earlier of making sure that the resources are well distributed. Whatever you have at your disposal, you want to have on hand. 5th edition is extremely generous with what your adventurer can carry and still be combat effective. So make sure that you have all of your weapons strapped to you. Make sure that you have those caltrops on hand. Don't leave this stuff at home, guys.
Yeah, exploit that.
If you're using encumbrance rules, make sure that your encumbrance is always 1 point less than the highest that it can go. Abuse the heck out of this rule and make sure that if you have 5 swords, you can pull out any 2 of them at any given moment.
See, I love the roleplay of sometimes going in with a light load, because the situation doesn't call for everything you own to be strapped to your back. But if I'm playing an adventurer, I'm expecting that even in situations where I'm expected to feel safe, I want to feel ready. I want to be James Bond with that Walther PPK concealed somewhere on my body at all times. That's why I love items like the Veteran's Cane that 5th edition introduced, or I'm not sure if it was introduced in 5th edition, but all I know is one fell into my party's lap and nobody wanted it, and I snatched that sucker up, because that meant that I got to go to the gala and have all my weapons checked at the door, and at the drop of a hat, I could transform this little wooden cane into a longsword and be ready for whatever was going to happen at that gala, because it's a gala. Something's going to happen at the gala, and I'm going to want a sword.
Right. I mean, in everyday life, we don't walk around with a backpack full of all of our worldly possessions, but as an adventurer, that's basically your work uniform. In the fiction of D&D, adventuring is a profession, and putting on your full battle gear and you're carrying around your backpack full of all of your adventuring equipment as you walk around the streets, eat, and go shopping is kind of just considered general practice. It's like your work uniform.
Yeah, when I was in pest control, I drove my truck around with all of my vermin-killing accoutrement and took it with me wherever I went. And I dressed the part, and I was equipped everywhere that I went. And no matter what situation that I was driving into, I had what I needed within 20 feet of me at all times. And that kind of needs to be the mentality of your adventuring hero. This is a crazy world. Vampires, werewolves, dragons, and aboleths exist in this world. Doppelgangers exist in this world. And the person serving me my drinks may be a weird alien creature who secretly wants to steal my eyeballs or something. God knows what. But I'll feel a lot better if I have something pointy close to hand.
I know that in our current campaign that you've been running for us, we have a character named Matsune, who is a samurai fighter. And his character, very realistically, has only had him dress for battle when battle is expected. The rest of the time, he's wearing his, I'm going to get the word wrong, but it's basically like his, little kimono thing. There's a word for that.
Technically speaking, he's wearing what is tantamount to a gambeson. He's wearing some padded armor.
There you go. That stuff. That's what he's wearing. So he's not wearing his heavy armor as he walks around the streets, as he enjoys a meal, as he goes shopping. And we've run into a couple of combats in situations where we were not expecting to have them.
It's almost like you were playing D&D.
When he was enjoying some downtime, or at least thought he was going to be enjoying some downtime, and then he had to fight at a suboptimal level. he was not empirically at a disadvantage against the other combatants, but he was not operating at nearly the capacity that he would have been capable of had he been wearing his armor. So, props to Matsune's player, who is a member in our Discord, for being so realistic. I really kind of increased the immersion in a way that I enjoyed and probably would have done myself at times if I had armor or could wear it. But it did make some fights a little harder than, say, you as the DM probably expected them to be for us.
I have applauded that player at the table and out of the game for making that daring choice to increase our immersion and to build the verisimilitude of my world. But I would also not have blamed them if they had decided, hey, I want to be walking around in my armor because it's special to me. It's a bit of my culture that is kind of absent where I am. And it is kind of a security blanket for me in a place where I feel uncomfortable. And you could justify it either way, but the game expects a 5th level fighter to be at least up to certain challenges and be able to withstand certain types of strikes, and that certain enemies that they will face to have a certain chance to hit. And that chance is radically increased when a player character is not wearing armor. And we're going to talk a little bit after we finish covering the rules on the fact that they're not laws, as we kind of mentioned earlier, but the game expects you, and your fellow players may expect you, to always be prepared for combat. And I think it is fair to say specifically combat.
ABA, Rob. Always be adventuring.
That's right. All right. So far, we've gone ahead and covered 10 points. I mean, we've fulfilled the assignment already, but we thought maybe we would give you one more, an additional unspoken rule of D&D.
That's right. We're going 10% further than anyone else has on their top 10 lists. We're going one step beyond and bringing you some extra content, really mostly just because I feel like this one needed to be said. And this is one, unlike the rest of these, I feel like this shouldn't need to be said.
And I kind of feel the same way, which is why I almost didn't want to include it. But then I realized my reasoning was because it's obviously an unspoken rule. So I guess it does belong in this conversation.
The last point on this list is don't lie about your dice. The dice are sacred. Don't fudge, stay in school. Only you can prevent number fudging.
I mean, it feels obvious, and yet I know I have played at tables where players were lying about their rolls. And you can tell. I mean, it's not a secret. Listen, you're not slick. However slick you think you are, we know, okay? And we're not impressed, and it's not helping the story.
At the end of the day, this is just as much a game as it is a social storytelling device. And it can't be a game without a degree of unpredictability. Otherwise, it's just an exercise. Otherwise, it's just entirely math. And the dice add that unpredictability.
And math is not fun.
For the most part, no. No, it's not. You may have to trust me on this. Believe it or not, it can be just as fun and narratively compelling to react to a failure as it can be to achieve an expected success. And it can certainly be fun to achieve an unexpected success against all odds. That's the sort of chance that the dice add to the game. And again, sometimes it can be really frustrating, but it's just the way the game is set up. And if one or more people around the table don't operate by the same rules that everyone else is operating by, the game quickly ceases to be fun for anyone.
Not that long ago, I wrote an article on loss and failure for the Dungeon feed on MistyMountainGaming.com, talking about how it can enrich the story. Sure, it can be a little bit embarrassing to fail at something, especially something that your character ought to be good at. But you need to make a little bit of a distinction between your character's embarrassment and your own. Because there's nothing embarrassing about rolling a poor number on a die that has 20 numbers on it. You're probably about 50% likely to roll double digits as single digits. So, no shame there. Besides, imagine if your character did succeed at everything. Let's imagine Star Wars, all right? What would happen if the first time that Luke encountered Darth Vader, he killed him?
The prologue would roll, then the credits would roll.
Yeah, sure. Much shorter adventure, much less character development. Let's take the Star Wars prequels. What if Obi-Wan had succeeded on that insight check and realized that, oh, crap, Anakin is going to become a terrible Jedi-killing monster in his young adult life? Sure, we would have prevented all of the future adventure, and I guess Obi-Wan's player could pat himself on the back, but is Obi-Wan killing a teenage boy very dramatically satisfying? I don't know. Loss is part of the story for me. Having Luke Skywalker be reticent to leave and follow in the footsteps of his father with old Ben Kenobi until he lost Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru was satisfying. Having Luke's journey to redeeming his father begin with losing a part of his body, becoming physically mutilated, is satisfying. Losing his friend Han to be frozen in carbonite and then having to go on a whole new adventure to rescue him is satisfying.
You know, interesting to hear that you feel so strongly about that, because I honestly considered not putting this on my list because I thought that this was something that you might disagree with, at least from a Dungeon Master's perspective. I know in previous episodes you have mentioned that DMs lie about their dice rolls and DMs fudge some numbers, and I got in those episodes kind of a sense of just acceptability or expectation even. That sort of thing should just be expected sometimes. And I know that this was also a point on Victor Cobal's list. Even though DMs lying about dice rolls wasn't one of his 10 major points, if you literally read between the lines, as in dig down into the paragraph that he wrote about each of his points, on point number 6, he says the party will be lied to, and then he further explains the DM might even fudge dice rolls or alter the scenario. I have not yet heard your reaction to that, but how do you feel about this point from the DM's perspective?
So, the Dungeon Master lying to you, and the point that he was making there, is true, and I feel it is obvious, because I'm portraying all the bad guys. They're gonna lie to you. Even the neutral guys are gonna lie to you. Everybody comes to every interaction with their own set of goals, and they will act in service of those goals at every opportunity, whether or not they're necessarily the best thing for you. So from the standpoint of NPCs, obviously, you're going to get lied to, but the players need to understand that I play the enemies, and I am not the enemies, and the Dungeon Master is not their enemy. There has to be a level of trust between the players and the Dungeon Master that this is fair, that this is a game, and that we are all beholden to it. Otherwise, I've just invited 4 of my friends over to do whatever I want to them. And that's just not fun or interesting.
Good. Okay. We're in total agreement then. Because, of course, it is the DM's prerogative at any point that they do not want to inject chance into a situation to just not ask for a roll or not provide a roll themselves.
Yeah, that's a pit I think that some Dungeon Masters fall into. Look, if I'm not prepared to leave something to chance, I'm under no obligation to roll. And neither are the players unless I, as the Dungeon Master, request them to. Nothing more of the game needs to be up to the dice than I, as the Dungeon Master, permit. So I am not beholden to the dice unless I touch them.
Yeah, and DMs, there's the little nugget of advice for you in this otherwise player-focused episode. If you are not prepared to deal with the consequences of a player's failure, then don't ask them to roll.
Or if you're not prepared to deal with the consequences of their success, don't ask them to roll.
Even if there is an applicable skill, you can dismiss it with a hand wave and either give or withhold the information that they are looking for.
I think I talked about this in a recent video on the YouTube channel as well. Just because a character says that they want to leap a tall building in a single bound, doesn't mean they have to roll for it. It just can't be done. And just because the bard wants to seduce the dragon, doesn't mean they have to roll for it. Maybe they're just not that dragon's type, you know?
So that wraps up our list of kind of the expectations and the social mores, the norms, the unspoken rules, so to speak, of playing D&D, specifically in 5th edition. But as we said, there is the concept that some rules are made to be broken. The best analogy that I can think of is comparing this to art. In art, there is a concept of understanding the rules so that you can then break them correctly. It's kind of difficult to quantify. It's pretty much based upon the perception of the viewer, whether it's the audience or the listener or the player across the table from you. The difference between being considered incompetent and pushing the limits of what is acceptable basically comes down to whether or not you are elevating the experience of other people or whether you are actively damaging it. It's the difference between being, say, a novice or being avant-garde. It's the difference between not understanding what the boundaries are and why they are put in place and pushing those boundaries and expanding them and redefining them for future generations.
When we were talking about all of these unspoken rules of D&D, I was biting my tongue on every point because I can easily imagine scenarios and groups, fellow players, and other dungeon masters where I have personally broken all of these rules.
Right.
And there were times when it was unwelcome, and there were times where it was incredibly memorable and exciting. Whether or not it was a positive or a negative thing didn't matter. This is a role-playing game. Both of those things are going to happen, but it drove the story forward. So the entire time, I was thinking of a line from Barbossa in Pirates of the Caribbean where the code is more of what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
Right. I said earlier that these rules are meant to be broken. That's not really how I feel about them. I think it's that there are exceptions to every rule.
And with that, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think it is a matter of tact and a matter of intent when these rules will be broken, and they will be broken, as to whether or not it is received well or received poorly. But regardless of how masterfully they are broken, I think it is fair to say that they are unspoken rules in the game that we love so much.
Definitely. And it kind of comes back to, on my end, what I said before about why you're doing what you're doing. You know, is this something that you're doing in order to hurt the party, or is it something that you're doing to try to enrich the story? Is this something that you're doing because you're kind of a selfish dick, or is this something that you're trying to do to move the story forward in a new direction? So, example time. Picture, if you will, a situation where the party has been confronting their arch nemesis, who just opened a portal and has escaped. The portal is still open for just a few more seconds. The paladin is standing at the brink of the portal, ready to jump through, and can see it beginning to fade and starting to close. They look back over their shoulder at the stumbling fighter who is struggling to carry the bloodied, mangled body of the wizard in her arms. Refusing to leave her wounded comrade behind, the fighter begs the paladin to come back and save their friend before it's too late. The DM informs the paladin that the fighter is not going to make it to the portal in time, and that once that portal closes, they will have no idea where the arch nemesis has escaped to, and they'll be back to square one. A choice has to be made. In that situation, what do? The paladin makes their decision. Tears drip down his face as he turns away from his allies, vanishing through the portal after the hated foe just before it dissipates. The fighter collapses in shock and defeat as she hears the final breath escape the wizard's lips, asking where the paladin is. As the wizard dies in her arms, the fighter screams into the night, swearing vengeance upon her supposed friend who abandoned her in her time of need. If I was the DM in that situation, I would be so stoked to have showed up to the game that night. 2 of the rules that I just went over were broken, maybe even a third depending on how you interpret it, but they were broken in such a way that enriched the story. If I was the DM, 2 of those players would be rolling up new characters for the next episode, and the campaign would then follow either the paladin on the heels of the villain, and who, unbeknownst to them, now has another nemesis hot on their heels seeking revenge, or we would follow the story of the fighter as they chase down their former ally.
That is unquestionably an incredibly dramatic moment. Now, I can easily imagine tables where that would not go over well. And I can imagine tables where we would all flip the table and toss our beers to the wall in raving excitement at how cool that just was.
Yeah, lots of table flipping and beer tossing in either situation. It's just either out of excitement or frustration. But it's a pivotal moment, and it all basically boils down to why the paladin made that decision.
And I'm hoping and imagining that there is a lot of personal grievance between this paladin and this antagonist in particular that drove this character decision. And perhaps they are going to make sure that what the archvillain did to their wizard friend is properly avenged.
Right. And what the other players around the table might not realize is, in my head, this is an Oath of Vengeance paladin. If they turned around and no longer pursued their revenge and tried to go help their friend, they might very well lose the power to do so. But the paladin doesn't have time to explain that. They only have to make the choice. They know that even if they stay, they can't heal the wizard. They can only continue to pursue.
That does heighten it.
It has to do with that whole thing where the paladins, if they break their oath, they lose their powers. So, but in my head, that's the situation that I have thought up, and the paladin's player knows that, and the fighter's player doesn't.
Or at least maybe the fighter as a character doesn't. But you make up this fictitious example unaware that I have been in almost the exact opposite situation in a game.
Oh, have you?
I played a tiefling rogue known as the Adder. His name was Ash, and he was a professional criminal. He was the head of a small but ambitious gang of ne'er-do-wells, and he took time out of his criminal organization management week to adventure with some erstwhile adventurers who were all more morally scrupulous than him, shall we say.
Okay.
And they assisted him at his direction in achieving a personal goal. They set him up to topple a kingpin of the established criminal organization in a city right before an invading army showed up at the gates of the city. That army was led by a general who is the father of one of these player characters. We had a brief clash in a castle, as I recall. When the tide turned against him, the villain opened a portal and fled. Next up in the initiative is the general's son, who charges through the portal after his father, after the villain of their own character arc, and the general of this invading force. It just so happened that I was the last person to go after this escaping foe. And to a man, every other member of the party chased their friend and his enemy through that portal. At the end of that combat round, my character was left alone in a throne room with a rapidly closing portal, an invading army on the way, and his newly established burgeoning criminal organization waiting for him and the entire party on a ship to take them to safety. And with a disappointed look at the portal to God knows where all of these valuable friends and assets just threw their lives away, my character turns, gathers his things, and makes his way towards that ship, freedom, and the life that he had always envisioned for himself. And that was a tough call to make. We ended the session shortly after that, and the game actually petered out quite soon after that session. But my friends and I, those players, often still talk about that game. And the main thing that we talk about is how every member of that party is going to hunt Ash down and kill his ass.
Well, and that frustration feels justified, right? Because they were all there to see his goals accomplished. And yet, from their perspective, as soon as they needed him, he was nowhere to be found.
Yeah, and I completely sympathize with that. I was just playing that kind of jerk, and one who didn't take unnecessary risks. That was a core element of his character, is he only picked fights he knew he could win. And it was the correct in-character decision, but it was definitely breaking some unspoken rules. And while no player at the table has a problem with me, another player at the table, everybody, including me, hates that character a little bit.
Just goes to show you, you should have listened to this episode and paid attention to point number 2.
Hey, he was an adventurer.
But not a cooperative one.
Just very calculating one.
Well, there you have it. Examples of things that you should do and certain situations in which maybe you decide to take a different route. The important thing is to understand what these basic expectations are so that you can then make an informed decision. And so that if you decide that you really want to piss someone at your table off, that you're not doing it on accident.
Precisely. And hey, I bet you there were a bunch of unspoken rules that you and I didn't think of before we recorded this episode. But you know who I bet has thought of them? People listening to this podcast.
Yeah, my list originally contained, I think, 10 points. You and I talked a little bit more about them. We took away some, combined a few, added a couple of yours, and we ended up with 11. But there's probably a lot more that exist out there that we didn't think of that exist within our own play groups. And importantly, not every play group is the same. So I'm very curious to hear about what it's like at your table, what your experience with the game has been. Because let's face it, in the grand scheme of things, in the broad scope of tabletop role-playing games, our perspective is inherently limited.
So, the usual channels for communicating with us are open as always. You can always tweet at us at Twinspiration on Twitter, and there's always going to be a link to our Discord server in the description of this episode. But Stephen has recently opened a few new avenues.
So our Facebook and Twitter have existed for quite some time, but I'm actually interacting with people on those now on a multiple times a day basis, which I'm very excited to do. But sadly, Rob, sometimes I log on to Twitter or Facebook or Discord, and no one's posted anything or responded to my tweets. Anyway, so in an attempt to reach out to even more people, I've also created an Instagram. Thanks to some of your friends at Misty Mountain Gaming and the online community that exists there, I'm trying to increase the number of social media platforms on which we exist. And I'm logging on, like I said, multiple times a day to try to make sure that there is something there to interact with. Maybe it's a heads up about a new stream that you're doing. Maybe it's more content that's planned for our channels. Or maybe it's just some funny memes that I found online and how they might relate to your D&D experience. Because I do have a lot of those.
Yeah, I wish you'd stop tagging me in those. Like, just because there's an example of a DM being a DM doesn't mean it's me, okay?
At any rate, you can find us at Twinspiration on Twitter, at Bardic Twinspiration on Facebook, and on Instagram. And of course, a link to our Discord will be in the description of this episode, as always. Please, log on and tell us about the norms at your table.
And hey, if Bardic Twinspiration coming out every other week is just not enough of Rob and Steve for you, good news. Thanks to my job at Misty Mountain Gaming, I am on Twitch, which means that I'm available twice a week, Monday nights and Friday nights, live. And about about half the time, at least currently, Steve is on there playing D&D, where you can see and make fun of us. We have been doing the Rhymehold Ritual campaign for several weeks now. Those are coming out on Monday nights, and if you aren't quite caught up, check out the backlog of episodes over on YouTube at Misty Mountain Gaming's channel.
But there's not just fabulous actual play content where you can adore my beautiful face on that YouTube channel. There's also a bunch of other stuff that Rob does where he gives DMing advice or explains game mechanics, gives a new perspective to players on various aspects of the game, or even homebrews monsters.
Yeah, that one was one of my favorites. I should probably do more of those. And in case you missed it at the front end of the video, we do have some exciting news in terms of things that we can now do for you, and that maybe you can do for us to support the show.
That's right. We're not just here to bless you with the sound of our voices and our sage advice. We also now come bearing gifts.
We want you to play D&D, and in an effort to do that, we want to save you a little money on D&D stuff. So, Misty Mountain Gaming, the company that I work for, has dice, acrylic dice, resin dice, metal dice, gemstone dice, glass dice, resin miniatures, leather bags, and books to keep your notes in, dice trays of all sorts, dice bags. And now, shopping online at mistymountaingaming.com, you can save 10% on anything in the shop.
I'm sorry, did you say anything in the shop?
That's right, anything in the shop. By using code TWINS10, that's TWINS 10, at checkout. Any money that you save on any purchase that you make goes directly towards us. So make sure that you use that, save yourself some money, and show the show a little love. Well, I think that overstays our welcome for this episode. As usual, we will be back in a couple of weeks with something new and slightly different for you. Until next time, friends and adventurers, farewell and Godspeed.
The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out. But unfortunately, sometimes What did you just do?
The arm of my chair was under my desk, and then it wasn't.
And player death will happen. It's part of player death. You were blocking their way and making yourself as hard as possible as your little 12 AC. Making yourself as hard as possible. Making yourself as hard as possible. You were making yourself as hard as possible. Don't just play D&D, listener. Play D&D sexier, and play it sexier on a budget.
Something about the word budget just isn't sexy.
Dear listener, we want you to play D&D, but we don't just want you to play D&D. We want you to play D&D sexier, and we want you to save money while you're doing it.
That's right. Spread that dollar. After you saying sexier, me saying spread that just doesn't quite jive, does it? Yeah. Okay. Enough there. Unless you had anything else to say.
Oh, no. If we've learned anything about this, if we've learned anything throughout the making of this podcast, it's that I do not have that much knowledge about monsters. The only time I beat you, I think, was that one time where you said something about bugbears
having shields.
Or not using morning stars or something like that. Yeah.
It was shields. I remember distinctly. Because
the one time that I had one over on you.
That's what I get for not using bugbears in my campaigns.